Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a regular podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I'm Andrea Giron-Mathern.
We are two friends, a therapist and a social scientist, both highly sensitive fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief.
Hey, Rebecca. Good morning.
Good morning, Andrea.
How are you?
I am good. I know that we have talked before about not saying things about the weather because we never know when they're going to air, but spring is my absolute favorite season. And the fact that we're starting to move into spring, my heart is just so overjoyed to be outside, see the green, see all the little early flowers popping up. And yeah, this is just my time of year.
I love it. I'm so happy. It is a good time. I love all the changes of the season, because it just brings something new and beautiful. And I love it.
Lovely. Yeah, I'll have to work on that part. Sometimes when spring is coming or when summer's feeling super hot, I'm not enjoying. I'm like, I need fall. Fall and spring are my faves, but I'm trying to learn to love the winter. I am not a Colorado native. And as a transplant, I don't know how it's not just only that you stay inside and drink hot chocolate. That's all I can do.
Yeah, I think being from here helps. I love all four seasons. And when I've lived places that don't have them, I'm like, aren't you fucking bored? Aren't you bored of your clothes? Aren't you bored of the same thing? And my family, my nickname, my boys call me is lagartija, which is lizard in Spanish, because I'm just like this little sun worshiper. So give me those hot days. I'll lay on a rock and just bask in them.
That's amazing. How's your heart this morning?
Oh, my heart feels so full. I am already almost in tears about our guest.
That's sweet.
Yeah. So I'm just so excited, and I'm grateful that she is my cousin, and I'm super grateful that she agreed to do this podcast. I felt nervous about asking her to do it, and it was such a beautiful hell yes when I asked. So my heart literally feels like it's bursting. It's so great.
I love that. Well, do you want to introduce our guest?
Yes, without further ado, another Rocky Mountain girl. So this is my cousin Tia. So she was born high in the Rocky Mountains and raised on the Great Plains, and has since been transplanted to the Pacific Northwest. She is a textbook Taurus, and I can definitely testify to that. Caffeine fueled, she is a single mom to the most incredible, spry, curious, wonderful, kind, loving 7-year-old boy. And she has, I don't even know how, I think she's had this dog forever. She has a 13-year-old Blue Heeler, who is she's the actual kind, loving dog whisperer. She's so incredible with dogs. She works now for a company in the tech industry, and there she caretakes her 400 to 600 other children, chasing them around, making sure they do their tasks. And she supports them all on a daily basis. She is super passionate about connection, curious about why we do what we do, and how we can provide tools for others to succeed in life and in their relationships. She is a huge sports fan, and I would say the biggest niggle or thorn in our relationship is that the majority of my family are Denver Broncos fans, and somehow this one is a Kansas City Chiefs fan. So I will never be able to reconcile that in my mind, but I love and support her. And she has been a Kansas City Chiefs fan long before Taylor Swift. She also loves lacrosse, which her little guy plays. You can find her yelling and cheering on the sidelines. She is a beautiful artist and creator. We have some of these little rocks that she has up at our cabin that people will find, and I love it. She loves writing, hiking, kayaking. She's an incredible Etsy, Pinterest level party planner. She is a game player, and she really loves her friends. Her journey to grief began before she even knew it, and she has brought her opinions and unique perspective to share with us. So without further ado, welcome, Tia.
So I'm super excited to be here, and I'm very glad that I was prepared with my box of Kleenex for that ridiculously amazing introduction. And I am so excited to be here, but also super nervous.
Oh,
There's a layer of nervousness around this conversation that I've been pushing through really hard for the last few years. So if you see me hesitate, it's just me reminding myself
This is safe.
not to let the inner conversation of how I was brought up in this conversation to affect my output and my opinions of all the things.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I feel that having been brought up in the same, just bizarre world.
The same crazy, interesting, chaotic, but beautiful family.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. All the things. So,
yes.
To give people context of sort of what on earth we're talking about. So, Tia, tell us your origin story.
Oh, good gravy. So, without going too far into it, I am a little bit older than Andrea. I'm adopted. I was adopted when I was about 6 weeks old. I was born in Colorado, as Andrea said, and adopted by my mom and dad. And they were living in Colorado at the time, surrounded by all the family. So my mother is sisters with Andrea's mother. And of course, Colorado had closed adoption. So that was kind of the start of the things. And it was the 70s, and very little was known. But I grew up with this, I don't know how to say, like dichotomous maybe relationship with my adoption, because on one hand, I was told this amazing, like I felt like it was a fairy tale story of how my parents got me, literally. And I would always think it was an amazing, fun story. And I would ask them to tell me all the time, which they begrudgingly agreed to do. But at the same time, I was also not allowed to tell anyone. They didn't want that knowledge out there for their own personal reasons. It was like this really weird situation where it was like, on one hand, this amazing thing, and I kept being told it was this amazing thing, but I was being told it was an amazing thing behind closed doors. And there's enough of a separation in our family. Andrea has an older sister and I have an older brother that are very close in age. But they had a whole decade of just the two of them being the only grandkids until I literally arrived in a box. We'll get to that later. I always tell everybody I kicked off the next generation, the next lineage, because then I was the next kid. And then after that, everybody else kind of followed behind. And now we have this amazing group of, what are there, like 32 of us or something ridiculous? There's a lot of us first cousins.
We're legion.
Yeah, we are a troop in itself. So that's the basis of the things.
It's so interesting to hear you tell it, because you and I have never actually talked about your adoption story and how it came to be. My aunt, her mom, has never talked to me about it, as is sort of the culture in our family. It's like things happen and we accept them and then we move on from there. And we don't look back and we don't talk about it. We don't unpack shit. We just move forward, even though there are all these family dynamics that are super clearly related to that point in our family's history. So I also have this like really mythical Cinderella-like story about your adoption that my mom told me. I'm just curious. When you said box, I was like, thank God they're both the same, because I don't want to be the one to say it if it's not true.
Yeah.
So I think it's incredible. So what did your parents tell you about your adoption and how they came to adopt you as their daughter?
So the fantasy story that I grew up remembering, hearing and begging them to tell me was that they really wanted to have another child. They searched, it was like this search to find, and then there was all these hurdles that they had to jump through with the interviews and the finding of the right thing and the paying of the monies and the counseling, and they had to go through an actual like class. And then they literally just one day got a phone call that said, hey, we have a little girl for you. And they had specified, because my parents are mixed race, they had specified that they wanted a mixed race baby. They said, we have one. Come on down. Here's the address. Bring a change of clothes and we'll see you there. And so they headed down to the place. And to my recollection, they said it was like a construction type trailer, like an outbuilding. Like in the 80s, you used to use them as school buildings, right? And so they got there and they said it was a little strange, but whatever. And they went in and there was a lady at a desk and she said, okay, welcome. Hi, sign this. And the baby's in that room. and go ahead and go in there. We'll give you a few minutes. If you decide that you want to keep her, change her clothes and go out the back door. If you
Right?
if you decide that you're going to pass, then just go ahead and go out the back door. We're timing you and you have this amount of time. And they said they kind of looked at each other like, what is this? And they went into the room and they said, I was literally in a box. And they said they just kind of looked at each other and went, this is crazy. And so they just did a really brief eyeball. Does she have 10 fingers? Does she have 10 toes? Quick, change her clothes and let's get out of here before somebody calls the cops.
Oh, wow.
So, and that was more or less the story that I was raised up with. Like, it was just this magical thing of them finding the right baby. And then, ta-da, I was there. And, oh, it was amazing and thrilling. And now I'm part of the family. So that was the narrative.
Does that match the story that you know, Andrea?
I think my mom had told me it was in the hospital. So I actually didn't know it was at 6 weeks. I thought you were newborn. I just assumed because my mom had told me it was in the hospital. But the same thing, like there was this room. They were told to go in. If you want the baby, change her and take her. If you don't, leave her in the box. And then, my mom kind of tells it like my aunt sort of seeing this like beautiful, innocent little baby in this box and just fell in love. And how could I ever leave this baby in a box? Dressed her, took her out. It was her little girl. But yeah, pretty darn close, which I'm impressed.
Yeah. Yeah, true. That game of telephone didn't change too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to pause for a minute as someone who's hearing this story for the first time, because I think you've both heard the story over the years, maybe multiple times. And I just feel so much, there's like intense emotion welling up inside of me. And that, God, I feel your parents' love. And I feel this like, there is no question, and what's happening should not be happening. And we're taking this baby out of the box and we're bringing her into our hearts. And like, wow, what an intense and beautiful origin story.
Yeah. And we'll also get to this later. But I think the other part, like, it's like, I've been hearing this probably only since I was a teenager. When we were younger, it was not a conversation.
It was not allowed.
Yeah, it was not a welcomed question. There was nowhere we could go to for answers. It was like some kind of signed agreement that all of our aunts and uncles kind of signed. And the cousins would get together and we wouldn't really talk about it because we were like, well, at the end of the day, it don't fucking matter. Like, we're all cousins and let's just get into some trouble. And we didn't get to see Tia super often because they eventually moved from Colorado to Wyoming. So it was like when she was there, it was like, one, I finally have a girl cousin. So let's play. And two, like, it was just, our special cousins are here. Like, let's not fucking talk about shit. That doesn't matter to trying to start a fire or whatever ridiculousness or playing tag, like, doesn't matter. And so I wasn't told until I was a teenager about it. And it was just kind of like, whoa, wow, how do we not all know that story? Like, that is an incredible story. Why wouldn't that be something that we all know? And then it was like, that was the end of the conversation. It wasn't like, oh, Andrea, now like this is the beginning of unpacking all of this. It was like, look, we answered your question. Stop asking. And then, and I will get to this because like I mentioned, Tia is now a mom, to think about just your mom self in that moment and thinking about a baby and connection and all of these things and just the sort of, I don't know, so many references, right? Like the sort of like, who was it? Put in a basket, sent down the river. Was it Moses?
Oh, Moses. Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's so many of these different images that sort of float through my head when I think about that story now. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to say, Rebecca, I want to thank you for the insight and that reflection because I've literally never had that conversation before or somebody else's perspective like that before. So being raised in that narrative, I expected you to say something different, like, oh my God, how shocking, and like a baby in a box, what? So I really appreciate your perspective of the magic and the love and because I really never thought about it that way, honestly. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I forgot to bring my tissue to this.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm going to have to wipe my face on the bottom of my shirt. I literally just had that. And so in talking about the sort of origin story and just giving a little additional context to it. So my aunt and uncle, Tia's mom and dad, are married, and they adopted Tia. Her older brother, my cousin, his father is from my aunt's first marriage. And so in this family, in just that sort of family, there's like an additional family dynamic, right? Of like a biological child who's biological to one parent, an adopted child, and then you sort of layer that then within our very large, very Latino family. And so I'm just kind of curious because we were apart for all of our childhood, really, because they moved to Wyoming when I don't even know if I was born yet.
You weren't.
Yeah, we lived apart. We've lived apart our whole lives. I mean, it is my true mission to get Tia home to Colorado. And so Henry can grow up with my little boys and I can have her around. But we've never lived together. And so I've never seen how all those dynamics sort of were for you. So I'm curious.
Yeah, it's a very special dynamic of which, how it's interesting because I didn't know that you didn't know about me until you were older. I did not know that my brother was not biologically my dad's until I was about 15. I found out by accident, and that's a whole interesting story in of itself, but I'll tell it really quickly. We moved out of Colorado when I was, I think, about 1.
Okay.
So right before Andrea was born. And we moved to Wyoming. And northern Wyoming is where my dad's family is. He's also from a very large family. He's the oldest of 5. And I have cousins on that side that have like one family who has like 18 children. So we were a really big family on both sides. So we were 3 hours south of that family and only about 6 hours north of the Colorado family. So we weren't together all the time, but we took a lot of opportunities to go either north or south whenever we could. So we were visiting the Wyoming family, and my grandmother, my dad's mom, was very prolific note taker journalist. She kept these like visitor logs of when family would come or friends would come, and she'd like write this lovely, it was amazing.
Oh, wow.
She'd write this little lovely thing about like, this is the date and this is who showed up and we had dinner and we did this and that and blah, 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 blah. And they were just these little books and they were just so amazing. And I was just being a bored teenager one day. I'm like, I'm just going to go through grandma's things. And I'm reading, and my mother's first name is not the name she goes by because she shares that name with her mom, our grandmother. So she went by a different name. So I was going through the book and I found an entry from the 70s, and it said, Jerry's here with his, I think it said fiance, and it said Linda, but it didn't have my mom's maiden last name. It had a different last name, and her son, Eric. And I was like, well, what? That doesn't, we're in the living room and I'm sitting on the floor and my whole family is just like, chilling around me. And I was like, Mom, who's this? And I said the name out loud. I said, who's this? And the shock and awe and fear on her face shut me up immediately. But then also she immediately, well, it felt like 10 years, but she immediately got up and grabbed me and said, don't say a word. Let's go outside. Oh, okay. She took the book. She closed the book. I don't know what she did with it. She took me outside and she said, we will not talk about this right now. You will not bring this up again. I will tell you when I feel like it. Oh, okay. So, I mean, I'm sure Andrea could probably literally picture my mother saying that because that's just how she is. And so that was it. But immediately I was like, but huh? Because, and I told my brother recently, I said, when I found out, I was angry, but I was angry not at my parents so much. I was angry with him because I felt like this whole time when I've been this angsty teenager struggling with my inner conversation of like, who am I, right? And this adoption story, we could have been commiserating about this because you're kind of in the same situation. I mean, it's not exactly the same situation. His story is very different, but I felt like we could have been supporting each other. And instead, we grew up with these very well kept hidden secrets, which was devastating in its own right. But it was shocking to me. And again, I eventually was told the story and my mother confirmed, yes, that is me. And she gave me a very brief synopsis, very, very brief. But then what happened was in the 90s when her father died, she did this whole life-changing course, an event that was like a 3-day long intense clinic, so to speak, public clinic. It was called the Landmark series. If anybody is old, they know what that means.
I know. Thank you for calling me out for being old.
if anybody here is over the age of 30, they know that. So she did that, and she came across all these like epiphanies of life, right? One of those was she decided to write a book, which I think she only published 10 copies maybe. And she only gave them to, I don't know if Andrea's mom got one. I don't know if she gave them to her brothers and sisters or not, but I know she gave my brother a copy. She gave me a copy. And I don't know what she did with the rest. I think it was a very guarded thing, but it was intensely eye-opening. And then she went on this crusade also. She kind of had an epiphany of how the secretness had affected me growing up. And then she went on this mission to try and find my biological mom. And that's a whole nother story in of itself. But yeah, it's really interesting and fancy and crazy, chaotic dynamic of not knowing things.
Right.
And also like the dynamic of who knew what when, right? So my older sister also has a different dad from me. My dad adopted her when my parents got married, and we all knew it growing up, but our messaging was like, yep, your sister has a different dad, and this house does not use half anything, step anything, like we are a family. And so I never want to hear that. But it wasn't like we couldn't ask questions or, I knew her dad's name. But I also remember later on, wonder if one day we'll have her on. She went on a journey to connect more with like her siblings, her other siblings. And I remember like being in a panic about the whole thing. So I was like, what if she doesn't love our family anymore and goes to the new family? But anyway, I digress. But what was interesting was because my sister shared that with your brother, I knew about your brother.
You did?
I did. I totally did.
Oh,
I know.
I didn't even know about your sister until way after I found out about my brother.
How crazy.
It's a soap opera. But it's a stereotypical Latina soap opera. It's like audience in the background gasping.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting as you've both sort of set up the story. It is interesting to me, the both and of the story, the way that there's like, there's this mythical story, or that you knew really young. Like sometimes people, when they're adopted, don't find out until a lot later that their parents aren't their birth parents and they were living kind of in that reality. And it seems like, okay, there's this much that we're willing to embrace and guide you through. And then we don't want to invite anyone into this. So now you're holding this. So is it a happy story or is it a shameful story? Right. I don't know what I imagine that's part of. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. You nailed it. It was a very like, well, you're really excited about this. So why can't I tell people? Because it seems like it's a happy thing, right?
Right.
So I didn't realize the context of why I couldn't tell people until I was much older. And again, when my mom wrote the book, it kind of shed a huge light on everything. But I was like, oh, this isn't about me.
Mm-hmm.
It's about her. Mm. It's about how she felt about it.
I imagine, just thinking, at least the 3 girl cousins. I don't know if the boy cousins are doing this as much, but the 3 girl cousins, as we've become moms, like unpacking the shit that was our mom's, that I think we carried as our shit our whole lives. I think about, like I said in your intro, like grief for you started before you even knew it. I believe in adoption. I have known parents who have given their children up for adoption, and it has never been like a flippant decision. It is rooted in a deep love and in nothing but aspiration of, I want them to have what I cannot possibly give them. And so I have this profound respect for parents that do it voluntarily, regardless of why they're doing it. If there are addiction issues, because I'm like, but you're making that choice for that child. And that feels totally selfless to me. So I just want to say that's my opinion. I don't know your birth mom. We don't know that side of the story. But, there is also a grief in it that story also begins with you in a box in a fucking room all by yourself. And then being told this story of sort of like the rescue, the little princess being rescued and coming into this family that's just full and dynamic and wild. And I don't know. My perception is like, for the most part, just being seen as part of the family. I'm sure that is not your full experience of it. But I'm just curious with that dynamic of incredible love and amazingness, and also like, and the grief of, I have a biological mom and I ended up being picked up out of a box. How did that kind of manifest in you? I know you said you became an angsty teen and we were all angsty teens, but I'm sure yours had a particular spin to it because of this.
I didn't even acknowledge or consider that grief started for me immediately. That's a realization I've only considered in literally maybe the last year. I didn't even have the realization that grief started for me so young until recently. I really never even considered it. I actually, if you would have asked me a year ago, maybe, how I related with grief, I would immediately default to a story about being in the 4th grade and losing a best friend, because that was my first relationship with grief, I guess. And just a very brief synopsis of that is we had a very small town that I grew up in Wyoming. I think our classroom was like maybe 15 kids. And there was one individual who at the time, and well into the 90s, I believe, was the youngest person to ever have a transplant because she was literally born with cancer, if I recall. And so she was in our class. She was my age. She was amazing. Her name was Kara. And so we had her up until 4th grade when she passed. Now, her being around was always hit and miss because we always knew that she was sick. Like nobody hid any of that from us. We all knew, but as far as I can recall, we didn't treat her any different. It was always fun when she was around because she wasn't there all the time. And I just remember very clearly the day when I found out she had passed was just like this shock to everyone, because we got this smack in the face of mortality, right? We're 4th graders. We didn't, of course we knew she was sick, but I don't think any of us had ever considered or even spoke about that it was a terminal disease or that was even a possibility. And so if you would ask me a year ago, I would say that was when my grief or my relationship with grief started, was in 4th grade when I had that. So I never really reflected on until the last year. And again, as Andrea said, becoming a mom, the whole part of grief starting before I was even aware of my own self, right? Because I'm an infant. And what I found out, and some of it's still unknown, but when I was born, I was held at the hospital. And so what I learned literally in the last couple of weeks is that there was a period of time where the adoption agency that handled my adoption had apologized to my adoptive parents because they weren't able to get me immediately. They had to wait because there was some health stuff that they were making sure I was healthy. And so instead of getting me immediately, there was a 6-week hold period, I guess. But we don't know where I was during that hold period. I don't know if I was with my birth mother. I don't know if I was in a hospital. I don't know if I was in like a foster care. I have no idea. Nobody knows at this point. So that 6 weeks, thinking about that and all that bonding time that you usually spend with your infant, all that skin to skin contact, all the building of that bond. Again, I never even really considered it until recently that I probably was most likely deprived of that in those very formative first days of my life. 30 whatever days, So I've just really started kind of digging into that. And what does that mean for me? What does that mean for other adoptees who may have a similar story? It always just brings me back to that nature versus nurture type of conversation that I always am super curious about. Like, did it affect me? Did it not affect me? Well, of course it affected me, right? Like, there's got to be things, but how did it then manifest in my life or in my personality, or did it even, or was I just always going to have that personality? Or it's really interesting subject to kind of dive into.
That's so true. I think with all inquiries of that nature, we kind of end up in a place of a mystery. I'm imagining there was something that probably came up for you as you were with your child in those first 6 weeks, some level of feeling something that came up that was like, oh, I don't know if I had this, or I definitely didn't have exactly this, because even if you were with your birth mom, somebody was knowing that you were going to be adopted.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I just feel curious, like, what pieces have you related to, or what's come up for you around it? I'm guessing it's not a complete story yet.
Yeah, it is definitely not a complete story, and it could be its own podcast in its own right, because it is a fantastic. The fantasy continues, I guess, is the best way to put that. It is its own fairy tale in the making, possibly. I don't know if it's a villain story or a fairy tale at this point, but what's really interesting is the thought of the deprivation of that didn't literally occur until about a year ago. So even when I was with my infant son, when he was born, I didn't know about the 6 weeks. I literally just found that out recently. And the only reason I found out is because I finally asked about it, because we always celebrated what my family would call family day. And it was just the four of us. But I just recently asked my parents, okay, I was born in April, but family day is in June. So did you just pick that day because that's when the adoption was finalized? Or did you pick that day for some other reason? And they said, we picked that day because that's when we actually got you. So that's a lot of time between like out of the womb and into the box, right?
Yeah.
There's a chunk missing there.
Yeah.
What happened? And that's when I realized that they didn't even know. But I've never really questioned that 6-week period. And so when I was going through my pregnancy and my journey through motherhood so far, my questions were more of the like, what did my mom do? Or when I was pregnant, it was always the want to question, like, I didn't have a birth mom to go to ask her about what to expect, or I didn't have a family history. That's always a thorn in my side. It's a very microaggression for me every time I have to fill out a form that, what's your family history? Well, I don't freaking know. So good luck, buddy.
Yeah.
Like, that's a very good microaggression in my life, that it's just like every time I get a freaking form. And when I was an angsty teenager, that I think was maybe what have kickstarted that angstiness around my adoption, is that, you have to fill out your forms asking your race and your ethnicity. And I always felt like I was lying because I didn't know for sure. And part of the fantasy that I was always told is my mother was Caucasian and my father was either Mexican, Native American, or both, but they didn't know. And some of the further narrative that evolved out of that was that my mother was an unwed teenage mother, and that she didn't provide any information about my birth father to the agency, so they didn't have anything. So it was always like, I don't want to put white. I'm not going to put Caucasian because that's only part of me. That's the obvious part of me when you look at me, but I was always too white for my mom's side of the family and too brown for my dad's side of the family. So it was always kind of a painful decision for me. So I didn't really dive into that 6-week as an infant loss conversation until literally very recently. And that kind of caused me to go down this rabbit hole of like research and reading other people's stories and finding books on psychology and like, what could that mean? And how does that develop? And how did that affect me later on? And very interesting little wormhole.
And it feels like, because I know those wormholes, that sometimes they're not actually empowering stories. There's a story of, oh, that was dire. And like, do we want to, when you know yourself sitting here before us as this powerful, I mean, your intro is freaking amazing. Like, I was just like, what doesn't she do? But it's like the beauty of who you are, diminishing it down to something like, oh, that was missing in the first 6 weeks. And that's the broken part. It's like, I don't know that those stories they're interesting theories, and they don't tell you anything about the human sitting before you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I liken it to like, an origin story of a superhero, right? You already have this person who has this like life and it's amazing and you're all interested in all the things that they do. But then when you find out their backstory, it's like, oh, epiphanies abound. And like, oh yeah, that makes up that thing. But I think what has developed for me, especially adding motherhood into the piece very recently, because my son is 7, as we said. So he's no longer that wonderful little infant. He's now just like this never-ending ball of energy.
So true. And I have two.
Yeah,
but he's like both of them combined.
They match energy, and it's just like one big Tasmanian devil ball around the house. Anyhow, but what I think I've really come across is I'm not really actively searching for those answers anymore. I mean, I am, but I'm not. I'm searching for answers on a different level now that I'm a mother. I really approach that journey now as more of an opportunity for closure for her than a fact-finding mission for myself. And I think that over time, especially when I was a teenager, I was like, why? And I need to know. And you have all these feelings, adoptees have all these feelings. I can't speak for all of us, but majority of, the not worthiness, the why was I discarded, the how come you couldn't do this or how come you did that. So you grow up with kind of that piece in the back of your head that then propels you through all sorts of different things in your life. But now I'm at a point where I'm like, being a mother myself, I would want just the closure of knowing that I did the right thing. And that may be accurate for her. It may not be accurate for her. Everybody has their own stories, but if it were me, I would want that closure. And so that's kind of where I'm at with that relationship now is whatever caused the situation that took her from intimacy, however that occurred, to having the decision, however that occurred, to bringing me all the way to birth, to then relinquishing custody. Like those are all huge, amazing, traumatic decisions in one's life. And to not know the outcome of that would be, I can look at it from her view now where it'd be kind of devastating to be like, I don't know if my birth child is out there being a serial killer or is she out there being, the governor or, an amazing hero? Who knows? Or is she a druggie on the street? I wonder if she wonders. And I would like to be able at some point to provide that closure to her if ever possible. So I think that's where I sit with that now, is that I grieve that for her more than I grieve the loss for myself, because I've had an amazing life and I've had an amazing family and we all have our stories. At the end of the day, I have over 250 close relatives. I mean, the amazingness of our family and all of the luggage and all of the shit, we're all crazy in our own rights, but I have had a pretty fucking amazing life. And my best friend, every now and then we're talking and she just looks at me and goes, you have lived 1,000 lives.
You have.
And I'm like, you know what, I have. And there was a very good possibility that at any point in time, from conception to 6 weeks after I was born, that could have dramatically changed. And all the decisions and all the trauma that she went through and maybe continuing to go through, I have no idea. Maybe she has blocked it out. Maybe she's not even alive anymore. Who knows? But I would think that that closure is necessary. And I would like that if it were me, to know that I made the right decision, to have that relief, to know that you made the right decision.
Sorry, I'm a puddle.
I know. It's okay.
Let's just sit with that for a minute. It's fine.
Yeah, it brings up a lot. And I think speaks to, and we're all mothers, something I think that sort of like, as a mother, empathizing with that whole process. I found out later in life, my grandmother, that her first child, she did give up for adoption. And there was all this weird mystery and shame. She was unmarried. She was young. I mean, there's a whole wild story that I'll save for another day. But so she has this secret. She meets my grandfather, then finally tells him, I think after they had kids, hey, I did have a child before. He's sexistly like outraged, that she had sex before marriage or something. And only recently my mom has been curious about this brother. Who is he? Where is he? How do we find? And I mean, that was the 50s.
Right.
And there was a moment where my cousin was pregnant in high school. She kept the baby. And my grandmother was like so bitter and mean about it. But then later to hear her story, I'm like, oh, wow, it's related. Like she responded to the shame that she felt and made a decision based on that and was like, we hide these things. And here's someone who's just doing the things she didn't get to do. So just like so much is welling up. I mean, I'm not going to wrap it up in a neat bow here. I just know like there's like so much pain around that. And like you're saying, you don't know the full story, but the sort of possibilities of, is she carrying shame? Is she carrying, she didn't get closure. She doesn't know I love my life. This might have been the best decision.
The other thing, I mean, I think that is, for me, it was just like cracked my heart open. Like, what a beautiful evolution. And I don't know, it just impossibly made me love you even more. Just, I know I would also be okay if you were like, I deserve to know for myself. I would also be okay with that. Like, it's just such a wonderful place. And I think one of the things that we have different degrees, you are adopted, we have different degrees of these like family connections, where it's like half this, married in that, divorced that, but they're still our auntie. Like, like we're just, it's complicated. And I think there's this idea of, but you got the best hand. So you should never want for what could have been. You should never question what might have been, because look, you do have a great life. Look, you do have an incredible family. So why would you even want to know? And I just want to honor, it's totally okay to want to know. And I remember struggling, like I mentioned, when my sister wanted to know, because I was like, aren't we enough for you? And I remember this moment when you did a DNA test.
Thanks to your family.
Right.
Let's point that out. Yeah.
We decided.
Thanks to Andrea and her literal immediate family for providing that test.
We decided to buy Tia 23andMe just to support her in this journey. And like, who knows? I have heard some crazy fucking tales from these genetic tests all over the place, like some beautiful and some like blew families up. So we decided to get Tia one. And she uncovers that she is blood relatives to one of our aunts who is married into our family.
Wow.
They're like third cousins or something. I can't remember.
Well, yeah, not quite third. But
okay. They're on the map.
So yeah, that was quite the epiphany and the shock, because you probably don't know this. So Andrea's family bought me that 23andMe kit for, I think it was for my birthday.
I think so too.
What a strange birthday gift. Okay. But sweet. But like, hopefully they knew something and it wasn't presumptuous. That's what I'm feeling.
No. I was actually so moved by it, honestly, because it was such a validation of like, somebody hears me, sees me, acknowledges the desire to know, when previously I'd always been fed the narrative of, you don't talk about it, right? And it's a shameful thing and we don't discuss it and all that ridiculous baggage. But unbeknownst to Andrea and her family, at the time I was married, and my now ex-husband, his mother is also adopted. And so she had also bought me a DNA kit, because it was like a buy one, get one, right? And of course she was like, I want to do it. And of course, buy one, get one. I'm going to have you do one too. So she got me the Ancestry kit that Christmas.
Oh my gosh.
Right before my birthday. And then they turn around just a few months later and get me the 23andMe. And I'm like, double whammy, right?
Wow.
Like, we're doing all the things. Take all my DNA. I don't care who's going to have my spit. You take it all.
Put me in every database.
Put me in all the databases. I don't care what you find out. Just put me in all the databases. Yeah. So, but yeah, going through all the, like, you get the little notifications when somebody matches with you or whatever. And I'm just scrolling through pages of like third cousin, fourth cousin, fifth cousin, sixth cousin, yada, yada, yada. And I come across, I think she's like my seventh or ninth cousin. So it's down the line. It's a ways. But I was like, that's my aunt's name. What? No way. So then I looked at the profile. I was like, no way. So I don't remember if I reached out directly to her or if I called my mom or whatever. And then I was like, holy crap, blood relative actually already existed in my family. And I didn't even know it. I mean, by marriage, fine. But then that also means that her son, who is my cousin, who is very close to us, was also blood related.
Mm-hmm.
So how fucking crazy that I was right there with them all the time. And they were literally blood relatives when I thought none existed.
Yeah.
So that was absolutely crazy. And unfortunately, there's not a lot that didn't lead to anything genetically because she also doesn't know her side of the family. And that's a whole nother story. But it was just crazy because up until then, I didn't really have anything to relate to other than my son. My son is the first blood relative that I know. And so that was crazy.
And I remember when you texted, I think like our whole cousin group, and I just remember being like, I'm such a fucking like mother hen, right? Like I'm just like, I love all my people and I want all my people to be with me and belong. And I just remember being like, see, universe, like she is one of us. She belongs. Like
she's one of us.
You were one of us no matter what, but it was like lovely. It just, I don't know, it really sang in my heart. And then when you said that about your son, I also remember the first time you told me that. We were at your baby shower in our uncle's backyard and you were preggo and you were like,
oh yeah, preggo.
So pregnant. And, I was like, how are you feeling? How are you doing? I was not pregnant yet. My boys are just younger than yours, but had been through a lot of sort of miscarriages and yeah. And so I just wanted to check on you, it was just like, how is your body? How is your mind? And you were like, I'm just wrapping my brain around when I meet him, that's going to be my very first blood relative. And I just remember being like, holy shit, that is a monumental thing, that most of us do not witness or have that experience. And I was so tender because it was like, our family was everywhere buzzing around and you and I were just kind of over talking, just the two of us. And it just felt so special that you could articulate that and how huge that was going to be. And then when he was born and you were like, oh my God, the first person I get to look at and like see, oh my God, that's my nose. Oh my gosh, without like wondering it was there. And he's so you, my God.
Without it being a lie.
Yes, without it being a fantasy, without it being a fantasy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he is so you, holy cow.
Yeah, he is so me. It's obnoxious. First of all, amazing that we have such a great relationship that I feel like I can be that vulnerable with you because I don't know that I could have really told anything aside from maybe my brother about that. Because again, I still catch myself in that not allowed to talk about it space sometimes. So that was probably one of the first times that I was able to verbalize that to somebody that this is DNA happening, right? This is me happening. This is me giving DNA to another human and that amazingness that I've never experienced before and having that totally different perspective because also the whole looking like somebody thing has intrigued me my whole life, mostly because I was always coming from a place of being told I looked like either my mother or my father, but knowing in the back of my head every time somebody said that, well, that can't be true. Like that's what you see, but you don't know. You're just saying something nice. And there are similarities. I can't discount that. There are similarities, but I always knew it wasn't true.
Or it wasn't because of some genetic, passed down of eyebrow arch.
Yeah, I just took it on that oh, well, that's great that you have that opinion, but it's not true. But of course, outside, I was like, oh, thanks, great, no, whatever. That's wonderful. I'm so glad that you think that I look that. But I always knew that it was that's not true. So I never really believed it. But I could also see evidence of it in other people. For instance, my brother and his son. If you take two black and white images of them at the same age, you cannot tell the difference. They are carbon copies. And in our big, giant, dynamic family, especially on my dad's side, it's really interesting because, again, my dad is the oldest of 5 brothers. And so it was always so fun for me to see a new cousin being born and then how that cousin would look like the other uncle did when he was a kid, or that one would look like that cousin, or, and they weren't directly biologically that uncle's children, but then they would look like the other uncle. So it was always intriguing to me to see that DNA loop and then not having that until I had my son. And even when he was born and people were telling me, oh gosh, he looks just like you. And I was like, okay, whatever. And it wasn't until I literally put a side-by-side picture of him as a baby and me as a baby kind of in the same pose. And I went, oh shit. Oh, that's a real thing. Because now it was real for me. I'd seen it in pictures of other people, but now it was real for me, which is totally different. And so now when people say that, it just fills a different part of me. When people say that, I'm like, oh, that's great. Yeah, he's also as stubborn as me. So yay, love. But oh yeah, he's also, yeah, so matches my energy and emotions, and that's fun. So
yeah. Well, I cannot believe we filled over an hour, even with our technical difficulties. And this happens so often, like I can feel so much more. I know you are still on a journey and there's like some exciting potentials in the journey and just unknowns and like unpredictable things that may pop up. You can always come here and talk with us about it. And I feel really lucky that you trusted us to take this story in. And I'm so grateful for you and I love you.
Well, I really appreciate you guys even holding the space. And Rebecca probably doesn't know, but I didn't know about this podcast until very recently. And I've been obsessing about it ever since. I was like, how come you didn't tell me about this? Oh my God. Same thing with like back to the brother thing of how come you didn't tell me about this? We could have been doing all these things. So of course it was a vehement hell yeah when she asked if I could do it. And again, yeah, I feel like we could sit here and talk for hours. But yeah, I really appreciate the space and even considering the conversation that has opened my eyes into like, how does that manifest for me? And how does that affect my relationship with everything and grief and love and people and all of that? So I really appreciate that introspect and that opportunity to talk about it.
And I know I've told you this before, but I would be remiss if I didn't say it in a super public forum. Like, you are also one of the best mothers I've ever seen in my life. Like, it is a joy to watch you mother. And I love your little boys so much. My boys are obsessed. You became a mother right before me. I feel like we're so in it. And like, as yours grows older, I'm like, what's coming next? And it's beautiful to have somebody to look up to in that way. So you're incredible. And you're a fucking single mom on top of it, which makes you like an actual superhero. So I just wanted to say that. All right. Whew. Well,
way to make me cry.
I had to do it. I was like, God, she hasn't cried since the beginning. All right. Well, here's the time when we just take a moment and reflect on how we've been touching into our grief this week. So I'll start with Rebecca. And if you feel like you want to do it, Tia, please, you can go next. But Rebecca, how have you been touching into your grief this week?
I feel like I've mentioned before, just really leaning into getting in touch with nature, ritual, like different things that help us honor our grief. And someone forwarded me something about this kind of self-guided study that 100% is everything I've been doing this week. And I've been feeling kind of a maybe about a lot of courses. And when I read this, it was my hell yes. I was like, oh, I'm absolutely doing this. And it's just blending ritual and nature and self-study with grief, leaning into grief and ways to honor our grief. And I couldn't be more happy, isn't the word. It's just like my whole soul is filled up with anticipation about starting this course.
Yay, that's so exciting. Tia, how about you?
I have been in an amazing place of everything happens for a reason cycle right now. And in addition to that, just honored the 2-year mark on St. Patrick's Day of somebody very dear to me passing. And so that stirred up its own. It's interesting how our bodies remember before our brains catch on, right? Like I was like, why am I so down in the dumps today? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's that time. Okay. But at the same time, there's a lot of other things going on right now that are just kind of like Rebecca said, like falling into place almost. Interestingly, the universe is making a lot of things happen right now. And I'm just like, all right, let's just go with it. I'm just here for the ride and doing the best I can and realizing that, again, because you've I grew up with the narrative in the back of my head, not that anybody ever told me, but just my own implied narrative of not being worthy of a lot of things, that I'm really stepping out of my own box in a lot of different ways currently. And it's really coming back in amazing ways and validating me in amazing ways and reinforcing that I'm looking towards the right things and that I'm on the right path for a lot of things, and that the journey that I want to embark on next in my life of empowering others and sharing my stories is the right direction. And so I'm just loving kind of like being caught in this whirlwind of the world and the universe pushing me in the direction that I kind of thought I wanted to go anyway. So I'm just thrilled.
I'm thrilled. I love that. I love that.
I mean, I know a very, very little pieces of it. Fuck yeah. Yeah, that's all. Fuck yeah.
Yeah. We might have to have a recap episode, in a couple months. We'll see. Yes. We'll see if things kind of fall more into place. We might have to have a recap episode of like, what is this mystery?
100%. Yeah. 100%. I'm so excited. As for me, I've been reading this book. My husband actually sent it to me. He's become also like this grief connoisseur, called Grief is for People.
Oh, I just saw that yesterday pop up. Weird.
It's really good. I'm listening to it. The author reads it. She's a fantastic narrator. I mean, I have so many like, mark the book, quote, mark the book, quote, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. So I'm nearly through it. Could not recommend it more. If anybody knows this author, her name is Sloane Crosley. Put her in touch with us so she can come be on our show too. Because it is so good. So that's me.
That's beautiful.
Well, thank you, Tia, again from the bottom of our hearts. Love you. That was amazing. I know you'll be back. Your path will continue to build in front of you, and I'm so excited for all that's to come. And
love and appreciate you both, and thank you very much, Rebecca, for holding all of this space for us to just gush about all the things.
Yeah, that was amazing.
I love it.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. I love you both.
Love you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at allthegriefpod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief. Take care.